Well, hello. Welcome, everybody, to the Psychedelic Association of Canada's podcast today. This is the first in our series of the Wisdom Keeper series of interviews with people that we know have a lot of wisdom, and we're here to find out what that is and have them share it with us. And in particular, Dennis, what is the title of this one again? Can you? Oh no, he's not there. He can't hear me. So we'll get back to the actual title, which is all about plants, because that is Dennis's expertise. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the Psychedelic Association before we start our conversation. And why we exist is to steward an evolution of well-being. And our vision is people living in harmony with each other and nature. Our mission to collaborate and advance access to psychedelics, and our values are love, courage, communication, integrity, impact, and sustainability. We do our best to keep to all of those on a daily basis. And these days that can be challenging, and we support each other in doing that. And I hope you do too. Our land acknowledgement I'd like to make is I acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today, acknowledging the impact of historical and ongoing colonialism, seeking reconciliation in friendship and action. So let's move on to our wonderful guest today, Dennis McKenna. He also is an advisory board member of the Psychedelic Association. Dennis has conducted research in ethnopharmacology for over 40 years, studying, collecting, and cataloging Amazonian flora with a specific focus on medicinal and psychoactive plants. His work focuses on the interconnection of indigenous knowledge and modern pharmacological science, documenting how Amazonian tribes utilize their rich natural pharmacopoeia. He's a founding board member of the Hefter Research Institute and was a key investigator on the Huasca Project, the first biomedical investigation of ayahuasca. He was part of the original scientific strategy team at Shaman Pharmaceuticals in the early 90s. He's also the younger brother of Terence McKenna. From 2000 to 2017, he taught courses on ethnopharmacology and plants in human affairs as an adjunct professor in the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota. In the spring of 2019, in collaboration with colleagues in Canada and the US, he incorporated a new nonprofit, the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy. In collaboration with colleagues, he organized two landmark conferences in 2017 and 22, which I believe were in England, the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs, also known as ESPD 50 and ESPD 55. His research, often conducted in collaboration with Indigenous guides, emphasizes the importance of preserving the biodiversity and cultural wisdom of the Amazon basin. He immigrated to Canada in the spring of 2019, together with his wife Sheila, and now resides in Abbotsford, British Columbia. Welcome, Dennis. Oh, you're on mute. There.
There.
There you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Jillian. It's a pleasure to be here. I just muted so that if I coughed or something, it wouldn't interrupt. But thank you for that lovely
You're allowed to cough.
introduction. I have mixed feelings about long introductions, but one of their virtues is that they eat up a lot of our time. So
We don't want that to
there,
happen.
there's less
I,
for me to do, but it's
I
a
did
pleasure
want
to
to
be
say it
here.
all, though, Dennis, because it's an astounding life that you have led, and your dedication and commitment
Yes.
to bringing these plants to our own and enrich our consciousness by the knowledge that you're finding? I just want to say it's cell-led.
Okay. I'm getting some glitches here in the
Oh, are
feed.
you?
Yes, you seem to freeze up for a few
Oh, I hope
seconds once in a
not.
while. That's beyond my ability to do anything about it. But yes, I've been in this game for a long time. Depending on, are you frozen? Can you hear me?
Ah,
We need technical assistant here. Can you hear me now? Okay.
I can. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just keep going. I sometimes freeze. It's not a personal thing. It's my internet connection. We're in the place that I am right now, but it only lasts for like 2 or 3 seconds and not very often. So you just continue on.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Well, as you mentioned, I've been in this game. I've been interested in psychedelics for many years, depending on when you start counting. I mean, I first discovered them as a curious, nerdy teenager in the mid 60s, and I was heavily influenced by my brother, of course, who was 4 years older. And he was kind of a leader in terms of wanting to push the edge of knowledge, the edges of knowledge. We were particularly interested in the paranormal. Uh, we were science fiction fans. Indigenous traditions didn't really figure that large when we were younger. We didn't really appreciate the indigenous role. But when psychedelics showed up in the mid 60s, we were fascinated by that. And that's what sparked our interest. And it really has never flagged. I mean, initially we approached these things as basically curious teenagers and what you might call recreational users. But then I got kind of serious about it. And you mentioned the ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs. Well, the first conference by that name was not a McKenna Academy initiative. It was sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health in 1967 and in San Francisco, of all places, to do something like that in 1967. And the taxpayer never got anything out of it except the book that was published, the proceedings. That book fell into my hands at the age of 18, the year after the conference was held. And I read it from cover to cover, and I realized this is actually a real thing. This is a discipline, ethnopharmacology. And most of the leading lights of the time, Richard Schultes, Andrew Weil, to mention a few that's well known, were at that conference, and it was an inspiration to me. And so
Mm.
that's what got me on my trajectory I decided, to sort of move beyond recreational use and curiosity to actually pursue a career in ethnopharmacology. And with a few stumbles, I've been on that track ever since. So I guess that's how I came to be here today with you.
Well, and it's a joy to be together with you today, Dennis. And thank you. We're honored to have you. I'm really curious, were you interested in plants as a young boy? Like, were you sort of out in the fields looking at plants and flowers and wondering about them?
Yes, yes. I was fortunate to live in a very small town, about 1,200 people in the foothills of western Colorado. So I had access to forests and semi-arid deserts and nature in general. And I was fascinated by nature. I used to enjoy hunting mushrooms and looking for plants in the environment and actually looking for fossils and shark's teeth and things like that. My brother was also an amateur naturalist, and he was very interested in butterflies. He was a butterfly collector, and he collected fossils and so, like many elder brothers, he was kind of a mentor to me. When he was not busy torturing me, he was busy mentoring me, and he led me into a lot of these esoteric interests too, such as alchemy and shamanism and Jungian psychology and in that period of the mid 60s when we were curious about all these things, we were discovering this body of knowledge that existed, mainly Jungian psychology and Mircea Eliade's writings about shamanism, a little bit, I mean, even at the same time, I discovered the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs, the book. That was about the same year that Carlos Castaneda's first book, The Teachings of Don Juan, was published. And that
Wow.
Terence gave me that for my 18th birthday, the first edition
Wow.
of that. And although I think the consensus now is that much of it was made up, but I didn't know that at the time, and it didn't really matter because what that did for me is it made me realize on the one hand, there's the scientific side, and then there's the indigenous traditional side.
Mhm.
And I understood that and that's what Castaneda's work opened up to me, that there's a whole tradition that is not scientific, that's based on a particular indigenous way of knowing that science doesn't really address. That doesn't mean it's invalid, but it doesn't address it. So a lot of my career has been trying to bridge these two. I think science enriches indigenous knowledge, and indigenous knowledge certainly enriches science. So that cross-fertilization is kind of what I've been pursuing ever since. That's ethnopharmacology inherently is an interdisciplinary uh, kind of activity.
Amazing. Um, I'm just going to take a moment to welcome everybody who is on the call with us today. Thank you if you are members of the Psychedelic Association, and if you're not, we'd love you to join us. The title of this conversation with the wonderful Dennis McKenna is Plants, Fungi, and the Origins of Mind. I also want to acknowledge Scott Nelson for being our benefactor in this series, the Wisdom Carrier series. And just very grateful for that, to making this happen. I think it's a big contribution to everybody that listens. So thank you. So Dennis, were there people sometimes, Paul Stamets talks about his moment when he was in this pouring rain and up a tree, that he had kind of an awakening moment. Did you have one? Did you have many? It sounds like reading the Castaneda book was an opening. How would you remember those experiences in your life?
Well, discovering the books, the Ethnopharmacologic Search and Castaneda's The Teachings of Don Juan, those were sort of significant books in sort of unpacking and discovering this whole area. But then, of course, my brother and I together, and each of us separately, were fascinated by these substances. And in the 60s, what was basically available was LSD. Uh, but Castaneda's work made us aware that there was a much broader spectrum of substances and plants and a whole set of traditions around that. One of the substances, which was very rare at the time, uh, very hard to get, was DMT. And DMT was fascinating for both Terence and me. And Terence was living in Berkeley at the time, so he was able to work the matrix. And DMT was around, was very, very, very rare to find, but he was able to find it. And this was not probably the DMT that one encounters these days, which are fairly highly purified substances. The DMT of the 60s looked like an orange smelly paste, but you could smoke it and it did the job. And the job, what was impressive to us at the time was that it seemed to be an order of magnitude weirder than LSD, which was saying something. It seemed to put you into actually another place, another dimension, something. one definitely has that impression on DMT. And because we were steeped in science fiction, and the idea of other dimensions was not that alien to us, you know. It was like maybe it really does open a portal to another dimension. And that's actually a debate that's still going on because DMT has some unique properties which we may or may not get into. Anyone interested in this, I suggest they read Andrew Gallimore's work. He's a neuroscientist who's looked deeply into this, and his latest book is called Death by Astonishment. And it it comes from something Terence said at somebody at one of Terence's seminars. Terence talked about DMT a lot, of course, and somebody at one of his seminars said, "Well, can you die from taking DMT?" And he said, "Only if you could die from astonishment." And and so Andrew took that.
Oh.
As the title of his book. He's written several before, but this latest one really sort of crystallizes his sort of worldview about DMT. And there is something about the substance that sets it apart from all the others, in a certain sense. So, uh, uh, actually, I should mention the McKenna Academy has a podcast called the Brain Forest Cafe, and we have a lot of interesting people on there, including Andy Gallimore. A few months ago, we interviewed him, actually, I think over a year ago, and that was a great podcast. So if you don't want to read his book, you could listen to the podcast. We covered some pretty wild territory there.
I'm sure. The nature of it. And when you said that there's still a debate, what is the debate with DMT? We're talking about DMT.
Right, we're talking about DMT. Well, it seems to put you people say the experience on DMT is realer than reality. You put It seems to at sufficient doses and threshold doses, if you cross the threshold, higher doses seem to put you into a place that seems very much like a different place, a different dimension, a different something, where there are entities. Terence called them machine elves, and sometimes they're elfin-like. I'm not sure I've ever seen a machine elf, but there are definitely a sense of entities there. And it's like you break into this place, on a high dose of DMT. It's almost as though there's a parallel dimension of things going on, and it's like a carnival. It has a very carnival-like character to it, and you get the feeling that this party is always going on, and you get to stick your head through the ceiling or through the floor, whatever it is, and look around and see what's going on in this place. And it's very much has the sense of being somewhere else. And many people, we know that people's response to psychedelics are very much related to their individuality. Everybody has kind of their unique psychedelic experience. But on DMT, at these higher doses, everybody sees pretty much the same thing. And the same thing, that this dimension that you get to pop into briefly, seems to be hyper technological. These entities are there. They are aware that you're there. They're very happy that you're there. They have information to impart. And it's almost as though they sense that you're only going to be there for a few minutes. So they have to give you an information download. That's one of the frustrations we found with DMT. You can't stick around. By the time you get to this place, it's already beginning to diminish. It only lasts about 20 minutes at the outside. That's typical of these short-acting tryptamines. So you're in this place, and many, many people write about seeing similar things. You see these entities, they're very concerned to impart information, and they often show you things like you can't really tell what it is. Are they machines? Are they, you just can't tell. They could be buildings. There's no sense of scale, but the things they show you appear to be these hyper technological artifacts in a certain way. Like, uh, well, you can't really describe them. I mean, they say about psychedelics in general, and I'd say it applies to DMT particularly, that the psychedelic experience is ineffable. You can't really English it. You can't really describe it. And that's kind of the place that this DMT space that it puts you into is. And Gallimore and other people have made great progress in describing this place and sort of made strong arguments for the idea that it really is something different. It's certainly different than all other psychedelics. Not that I've taken all other psychedelics, but most that I'm familiar with. DMT occupies a kind of unique place here. And so,
Beautiful.
so I
And
guess
so,
I can wrap that up by saying that's what really got us fascinated. It wasn't just another drug, another psychedelic. It was the most interesting thing that we'd ever encountered, not just the most interesting drug.
what is it what impact has that had on you and how you relate to this reality and how you feel and think about yourself and life? How have those visits into that other place impacted you?
Well, I think that uh, the indigenous people have this perspective about these sacred plants. They refer to them as plant teachers or fungal teachers. We have to remember that fungi are not plants, but we'll call them honorary plants for the moment. But indigenous people understand that these are wisdom keepers. People are not only wisdom keepers, these substances are wisdom keepers. And if we can access them, they have a lot to teach. They have a lot and we have a lot to learn. So my relationship to those things, my experience has been it's kind of like being able to spend time with the most interesting and educated and intelligent person you could imagine, who knows far more than you will ever know. And one of the things that you come away with, that I have come away with, and this has been true of ayahuasca as well as DMT, but maybe particularly ayahuasca, uh, which is another teacher plant that you can learn a great deal from. And often for me, the take-home lesson is a reminder of how little we know and sort of our suppositions about the nature of reality are challenged by the psychedelics because we have ordinary day-to-day reality, ordinary consciousness focused pretty much on the outside, and it's mundane, ordinary consciousness, what they sometimes call the default mode network these days. But DMT or ayahuasca or psilocybin or all of those things, what they do is they disable the default mode network temporarily.
Mm.
These strictures that basically control what gets in. The mind constructs a false reality. It constructs a model of reality. That's the reality that we live in, not reality itself, which is out there somewhere, we assume, but it's unknowable. What we inhabit is this model of reality that our brains construct so that we can navigate through the world. The neuroscientists call it the default mode network. I prefer to call it the reality hallucination. We, we live embedded in a hallucination. ordinary reality as it is experienced is effectively a story we construct to make sense of both the external information that's coming through our receptors, our sensory neural receptors, and then that information is processed internally through associations with memories and other things, and effectively extrude this model of reality that we proceed to inhabit. And psychedelics are useful for disrupting that. And they just blow it apart. And temporarily, probably we should think, thankfully, temporarily, they blow it apart and they make you realize that there's a much greater realm of apprehension and understanding that your constricted little reality hallucination does not encompass, and it's useful most of the time. Most of us don't want to be on psychedelics 24/7. We could not handle it. So it's, excuse me, it's useful to be able to step out of that reference frame temporarily on a psychedelic, and particularly useful if your reality model is not working for you. If you have problems like addiction and depression and trauma and these sorts of things, these things sort of become incorporated into your reality model, and they're not supportive, they're not beneficial or positive. So the chance to reconstruct that and tear it all down and build it back up in a way that is more positive, that's the nub of the therapeutic uses of psychedelics, I think. They give you that opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you didn't have any of those things back in the day. You just had these experiences with your brother and then continued on after you
Right.
lost him. So without those sort of therapeutic supports, how did you manage popping into this world and then another world and then coming back? How did you sustain yourself?
How did I sustain myself?
Yeah, like, some people would go mad and not know what to do with all that information. So how was it for you?
Well, anybody who knows the Terence and Denny mythos, the Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna mythos about La Chorrera and all that, knows that we did go mad. When we went to South America and we were looking for a more exotic hallucinogen from a obscure plant. We were looking for a plant that that had DMT in it, but that afford a longer experience. And because that was one of the frustrations of smoked DMT. It's so short. By the time you're just getting used to it, it's all over. So we went to South America looking for this obscure plant called ukuhe, which was derived from Varola, one of the members of the nutmeg family. The Varola is used as a snuff in many parts of the Amazon, but some tribes use an orally active preparation. That was our motivation to go to La Chorrera because that was the ancestral home of the Witoto people, and they're the ones that had this knowledge. When we got to La Chorrera, it turned out that it was a mission town in the middle of the Colombian Amazon, and several acres around that town, call it a town as an exaggeration. It was a mission, a church, a jail, a few buildings. But around that little settlement, they cleared pastures and they brought in these Cebu cattle, the white humpback cattle from India. And the dung of those cattle happens to be the preferred substrate for Psilocybe cubensis, the pan-global psilocybin mushroom. And we happened to hit the season just right. We got there in the rainy season, and there were clusters of mushrooms growing out of every cow pie in this, in this pasture. And and we had no experience with it, basically. We knew what they were, but we hadn't had any real experience, any real encounters. So we started eating those, and our quest for this other obscure hallucinogen kind of got left aside, as the mushrooms, uh, which presented themselves very much as a teacher entity. We called it the teacher. And the teacher had a lot to tell us. And so we're downloading a lot of information. Uh, and those who want to read about that can read our first book, The Invisible Landscape. Uh, but that was kind of our um, I mean, to get back to the theme of going mad, we did go mad temporarily after consuming lots and lots of mushrooms in a way that was effectively very thoughtless and not careful at all. But it put us into this place of ideas that were just bubbling up about many, many things, the nature of space-time, the nature of our biology, and it's that's not really a rabbit hole I want to go down right now because we'll be here, that all
Till
night.
tomorrow.
People can read about it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrence's book, True Hallucinations, or my book, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, uh, uh, delves deeply into all this. But
Mhm.
so then, I guess as a result of that, uh, we had on the other side of this experience, which lasted about 3 weeks, when we actually got our feet back on the ground and back in civilization. Our reaction to it was really quite different. I was like,
Mm.
I wanted to get back to ordinary reality. I'd pretty much had enough with this other dimension stuff. I decided to shift my studies to a more scientifically based career. Instead of, I shifted from comparative religions to pharmacology and chemistry and botany, started studying those things. Terence had almost the opposite reaction. I mean, his response was, "Well, what good is science? Science will never explain what happened to us." So he kind of rejected science, and he went
Mm.
off and became, the psychedelic philosopher that everybody knows him for. He rejected science, and I was in our conversations between this, I said, well, wait a minute, you're a little quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Science is valuable. We can't reject science until we've learned how to do science. And that's what I felt that because what we were doing at La Chirera was not science. I mean, we may have deluded ourselves that it was science. We call it the experiment at La Chirera, but it was in no sense a conventional experiment. We should have called it the ritual at La Chirera or something like that, because that's really what it was. But so we had these two trajectories, and I kind of retreated, you might even say, into the study of science. And science, among other things, it's the science of measurement. If you can't measure something, you can't really approach it scientifically. That is both the power and the limitation of science. It doesn't deal with all that woo-woo stuff.
Mhm.
It deals with what you can measure, what you can see. Now, of course, in the current era, science has had to confront all the woo-woo stuff, as psychedelics have gained recognition and interest has been sustained, and people realize, oh, these are for something more than just tripping. They actually can be used to help people. in very profound and important ways. So, but in order to sort of come to terms to that, science has to confront a lot of its own assumptions. This idea that, that reality is only based on what you can measure. Well, about 10,000 to 2 million years of indigenous tradition and indigenous encounters with these plants and fungi tell us that there are more ways of knowing than the scientific ways of knowing. Science is very useful within its own limits. And as long as it acknowledges those limits, it's very useful. But it should not be, there's plenty of reason for scientists to be humble rather than arrogant.
Yeah.
We can be proud of what science has uncovered, but also what science forces us to do is recognize how much we don't know about the nature of the universe and the nature of reality. So we should be humble at the same time, try to expand the limits of our knowledge.
Beautiful. And when you talk about the knowledge that the people living with these plants in the tribes around the Amazon have experienced, what I know it's hard to maybe put it into one piece, but how would you be able to describe what you got from dropping into their world and learning from them?
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry. I wasn't. Say again. You frozen?
Oh, shit. Yeah, sorry,
Cool.
I froze that
Sorry.
time while I was talking. That was silly. Try not to do that next time. So how would you be able to characterize what you learned from those experiences of living with people with the tribes in the Amazon? Like they, as you said, they have so much information and wisdom and knowledge that they have gleaned over millennia. And how has that impacted you? What would you say it is that you got from them?
Well, I think just the understanding that the lens, if you will, or the lenses through which they view reality is very different than the ones that we Western people view it. I mean, that is the main thing. I think sometimes I often say that one thing psychedelics do, especially if you take it in nature, is it brings the background forward. There are things going on in nature constantly, complex processes, all kinds of things. We're programmed to ignore those things largely. We're programmed to focus on what's right in front of us. And that's in part an effect of literacy, and we're always looking at books or screens. That implies a separation between the observer and what is being observed. I think the experience of an indigenous person, and to a certain extent children before they have become literate, is very similar. They have no filters, they have no boundaries. They're not separated from what they're observed. They're immersed in this process. They don't see that there's a boundary between them. And so that's what I mean when they bring the background forward. They put these things in front of you that in the construction of this reality hallucination or this default mode network, we're programmed to suppress those things because they're not perceived to be relevant to our immediate survival. You want your attention on the saber-toothed tiger that's about to eat you or the bus that's about to run over you. That's where you want your attention to be. But if you can do it, this is why set and setting is so important. You need to take these things in an environment where you don't have to worry about these real world issues of survival and hazards and so on. You have to take them in a setting that is appropriate for you're making this deliberate decision to open up, to surrender, to sort of take all your defenses down and let whatever the mushroom, whatever the plant teacher wants to tell you, let that flow in without impediment. But you have to do it in a place and time where you feel safe in doing that. That's why it's important if you have a guide to be able to trust the people that you're taking it with, or if you even if you take it by yourself, to do it in circumstances that are appropriate. And if possible, do it in nature. I think the quality of the psychedelic experience is nature is very different than doing it in, say, a clinic, with eye mask and music and all that. And that's okay. I mean, people sometimes need that. Uh, and that's the way most of the therapeutic people developing the psychedelics for therapy, that's the way they approach it. But I think that is kind of a deliberate impoverishment for safety's sake of the spectrum of things that you can explore on psychedelics. It's much better to do it in nature because then
Mm.
you get to see and observe this quality of the background coming forward. If you walk into the forest, for example, in the company of an Indigenous person, your experience of that is very different than theirs, because they are seeing things and they are attuned to things that you're just not aware of, because we're programmed through, literacy. They're actually in neuroscience, this is called neural gating. We have neural gating structures. A lot of what the brain does is it accepts information from the outside, it processes it into this reality hallucination, but a great deal of its function is to filter stuff out, that would be distracting, that would be otherwise confusing. That's the neural gating process. And like it's deliberately your brain's response to this and say, we're going to make your experience of reality a little more boring than it actually is, so that you can navigate, so that you can keep your feet on the ground and keep your attention focused and all that. And psychedelics are the opposite. Psychedelics are a deliberate attempt to disrupt all that, and then see what comes in. And that's why they're so powerful for that, I think.
That's so beautiful. Um, I'm just thinking about the state of the world today, talking about madness. Of course, I didn't mean that you went mad, even though Robert Laurie thought that I was saying you were certifiable, but because he's on the thread here. Hi, Rob. What's your take on it, and how do you suggest we navigate through just regular people?
What's happening in the world today? Oh man,
Yeah,
that's a tall order, Jillian. I
it is.
I don't
You're up for
know.
it, Dennis.
I don't know. I mean, it's true. It's like reality itself has become pliable, has become, I mean, you can't, it's very difficult to talk about. I mean,
Mm,
I obsess about all this probably like a lot of people way too much, or maybe not. I mean, maybe I don't know what the answer is. I do think that one thing that psychedelics can do is they can change a person's perspective on things. That's part of the therapeutic benefit of them, that, under the right circumstances, with enough experiences, you can actually change your perspective on things and hopefully become a wiser, more compassionate, kinder person. As Rick Doblin often said, or has said, people don't take psychedelics to have great psychedelic experiences. They take psychedelics to become better humans,
yeah.
and I think, I would like to believe, but for example, if Trump were to take a psychedelic, would it help him? Probably not, because I think what you have to have a soul, you have to have something that corresponds to the soul, whatever we may call it. I don't think he has it. I think he's a
Mm.
hollow man, and probably nothing would be a cure. But for other people that are not so damaged, it might be able to help people change. You know, I understand you all probably heard that there are actually groups of very right-wing people who take psychedelics, and um, I don't understand how they can stay that way, frankly,
Yeah,
if they get those revelations. And
yeah,
because so much of the policies and so far, at least of the US government, it's all based on cruelty and
yeah.
no empathy and just a lack of almost a deliberate effort to hurt as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. How people who are so like that, stuck in whatever we want to call it, let's not call it anything, but we know what we mean. And so you were talking earlier about the brain, the gating, we're sort of shutting off that ability. And but there also seems to be uh, when these medicines encounter a very strong ego there isn't disillusion of the ego. It seems to kind of keep at it and
Right.
make its own interpretations of what it sees. And so, any thoughts about that?
Well, not really. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's not, I mean, if it's psychedelics are not going to make a stupid person intelligent. They're not going to make a bad person good. They're not going to turn us into saints. All they do is give us some raw material to work with, and they give us, well, I think, where the therapeutic potential of psychedelics is they give you a chance to uh, spend time in this space where all of your assumptions can be sort of put aside for the moment, and it provides a space for self-reflection, but you have to be capable of that.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
think I think
exactly.
Trump's a good example. The man has never had a reflective moment in his life. He is
No,
incapable of it.
sad. I find that really sad, actually.
Sad
So
for us too.
and sad for the human race, absolutely. And so, so let's move on from that because it's I think you gave a really full answer and thank you for that. And this is a question from Richard, um, so who's on the call here, and he wants to. Richard is very fascinated by consciousness, and I think we know the answer to this question, but we'd love to know your answer too. Are we consciousness in the universe, or are we universal consciousness?
Well, you don't ask the easy questions. And I think the answer, Jillian, is who the fuck knows, right? I mean,
Maybe who the fuck cares? But anyway, carry on.
but I think that we really don't know these answers. But so, given that these sort of ultimate profound questions, I think what you're asking is consciousness just about us? Like, we're the main conscious species on the planet? What's emerging now through neuroscience and other types of studies is that certainly we don't have a corner on consciousness. Humans don't have a corner on consciousness. We see that consciousness is found in all sorts of living things, animals, even plants. There is now serious studies about plant intelligence, and
Mhm.
uh, I think I'm a panpsychist, actually. That's my position. I think that consciousness is built into the universe as a fundamental property. I think it's found at the most fundamental levels of organization. It's something like the Planck constant, or it's actually a property that is found in the universe at all levels. Even the electron has a certain consciousness. Maybe consciousness is not the word. An electron has the experience of being an electron, right?
Uh-huh.
It probably doesn't
Uh-huh.
reflect on that because it doesn't do,
No,
that's not within its purview to do self-reflection, but it
but it knows it
experiences
is.
it. And I think that consciousness is a fundamental property of reality, basically.
Mhm.
From
Beautiful.
the most fundamental levels to the most complex levels. And you see articles now, occasionally somebody published an article about how, there's reason to think that galaxies are conscious, stars are conscious, and yeah, the whole spectrum of living things on the planet are conscious. And if you look at that's easy to perceive, particularly if you take psychedelics and look at nature. You
Helps a lot.
understand that intelligence is built, is that the natural world is permeated by intelligence,
Mhm.
And so what is intelligence? Well, intelligence in some ways you could think of it as it's an approach to existence that optimizes uh, that optimizes your experience, that sort of tends toward beneficial experiences. I'm not being articulate about that, but that's kind of the idea. I think consciousness is something that permeates the universe, but only when organisms reach a certain stage of complexity does it become manifest, I mean, you can grant that a bacterium, has consciousness, but it's very hard to communicate with a bacterium. It's very hard to, we can't send it a text and say, well, what are you
What's
experiencing?
up?
Just can't do that. So we grant that it has consciousness of some kind. And it certainly everything that exists has experience. It experiences its existence. It may not be reflective about it, but as organisms become more complex, these properties become emergent, and consciousness becomes ever more evident as complexity increases, you get much higher levels of consciousness in, say, multicellular organisms than you do in single cell organisms. But you shouldn't underestimate those because they too experience in their environment. They can respond to it. They can, avoid harmful things. They can move down chemical gradients toward food or away from toxins. This has all been worked out in model systems like slime molds are a good example. I mean, slime molds are incredibly intelligent. You can put them in a maze and they will solve the maze very readily in the most direct way possible. There have been studies on this, but
That's astonishing. What is a slide bolt?
what?
What's a slide bolt?
Slide
What did
ball?
you say? Did you say slide bolt?
No.
Can if you put it in a maze? You said if you put
Oh,
it in a maze.
a slime mold. Yes, we were talking about slime molds and slime
What
molds.
is it?
Well, it's something like a fungus, but not really. It's in one of those categories it's mold-like, but it's actually slime molds are an agglomeration of single cells that cluster together and form kind of a superorganism, a collection of these cells, and it moves across the forest like it just if you see it in nature, it looks like somebody has spilled something yellow on the log, but then it actually moves across the log, and you can put it through a filter and all the cells will separate, but they'll collect and re-aggregate on the other side and continue on their way. The experiment I'm thinking of, the experimenters built a maze that was modeled on the Tokyo subway system, right? And that was I mean a model of that. They put the slime mold into it, and then they would say, okay, you're at this station. How do you get to, the station across this network? And they just let it go. Maybe and the slime molds found the fastest, most efficient way to get to that place in the maze. So, tell me that consciousness,
Isn't there?
it's there. I mean, it's
Or
clearly there. Plants also show consciousness. Michael Pollan has just come out with a new book on this, which I just ordered, so I can't claim I've read it, but he's a good writer, and he wrote How to Change Your Mind, a groundbreaking book on psychedelics. There's much of it that I don't agree with, but he is a good writer. I grant him that, and I've read most of his stuff. I'm fascinated to read this new book, which is, I think, called Consciousness Emerges or something, because
yes.
he'll have good things to say about it, interesting things to say about it.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, well, that
Thank you for that amazing information about slime mold.
yeah.
Um,
Well, if you look, as we were riffing a little bit about plant intelligence, there is, you know,
yes.
I mean, one place where this is really manifest is through the process of symbiosis. And I go
Um,
on a lot about symbiosis. The McKenna Academy is all about symbiosis, but symbiosis is a close association between two organisms, or sometimes more than two organisms of different species, right? Usually for mutual benefit. For example, the association between old growth forest trees and the root systems of those trees, those root systems are covered with what's called mycorrhizae. They're sheaths of fungi that encase the roots, and they assist in nutrient transfer. And so it's a true symbiosis. They make inorganic substances like minerals and so forth that the fungi sequester, they get from the soil, and they transfer it to the trees as a nutrient source. The plants, of course, produce sugars, and fungi feed on the sugars. So there's this mutual symbiosis. The plants produce the food for the fungi, and the fungi facilitate nutrient transfer from the soil, and uh, it's a whole symbiotic network. And as a result, the whole forest ecosystem, the old growth forest ecosystem, is basically like an enormous internet.
mm,
There's all sorts of signal transduction processes taking place in that. And there's a woman from UBC who's written beautifully about this, Suzanne Simard. And she wrote a book called Finding the Mother Tree. And it's all about this. and it's an incredibly moving book. And it's a moving. She's a forest ecologist, basically. She's not a psychedelic enthusiast, but I don't know if she is or not. But she's a forest ecologist. She spent lots of time, and she's really broken a lot of paradigms in terms of the assumptions of forestry and how you manage these complex forest ecosystems, which are all networked together by fungi. There's ways to contribute to their sustainability and ways to disrupt that sustainability. Unfortunately, most of the current practices of forestry is as practiced in by the Department of Forestry at UBC, for example, are totally against this. And Suzanne has been stigmatized as, just some kind of woo-woo hippie that goes out and dances in the forest,
What's the trees?
and they
Yeah,
like to put her down. But then she just keeps publishing, in journals like Nature and Science and so on. So her work is solid,
good.
and uh, uh, and it's also the book is really an interesting uh, personal story about a woman and her attempts to become a scientist and gain recognition and gain respect because
A
particularly
lot.
in things like forestry, there's a built-in prejudice against women,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, well, that's just unfortunate. But
Yeah.
also, I think women, because of their biology, they're the ones that have the babies, and they have a more sort of inbuilt understanding and relationship to nurturing and that sort of thing. And her colleagues really did not respect her work, but she just kept plugging away
Good for
and
her.
publishing these amazing books and numerous papers in top-notch journals. I understand she has a new book out, recently published. I haven't looked at it, can't even tell you what the name is, but Suzanne
This one.
Samard is someone to look at. Yeah, you put
Yeah.
it in the Finding
It's
the
in the
Mother
chat.
Tree. Yeah,
Yeah, it's in the
fantastic
chat.
book.
Got
Fantastic.
it. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning her and saying that about the value of bringing men and women together in whatever things that humans are up to. One without the other isn't, just doesn't really work. There's something missing. We have a question from, I don't know who, asking you to say a little bit more about alchemy. Did you
Alchemy.
have, did you have a lab and did you follow spagyrics? Spagyrics?
No, I didn't. I didn't have a lab in that sense. My appreciation of alchemy was academic, not experimental, really. And it was guided by Jungian psychology and Jung's perspective on alchemy. Alchemy was in some sense, the precursor to chemistry, right? But on some level it was. But as Jung pointed out, alchemy was really about self-transformation, this property, this process that he called individuation, which was a way of becoming more balanced and integrated. Individuation was the process, and alchemy was a way of projecting that process onto matter as a as a kind of model. So by projecting it onto matter, what it was really reflecting was an internal process. They weren't really trying to change lead into gold, I mean, they would have loved that, but no, they weren't trying to do that. They were trying to advance spiritually to become more integrated. I mean, the philosopher's stone, the quest of the alchemist is really the transformed self, the individuated self. And so that was my interest in alchemy. And but as a result of that, I also got interested in chemistry, which is also a pretty cool discipline, even without the spiritual aspects, because chemistry is the science of stuff, right? And basically, at its root, chemistry is the science of stuff. And that includes psychedelics, and that includes all the marvelous chemical uh, abundance of nature. This is what plants are very good at. Plants are virtuoso chemists. And the reason that they're such good chemists is that they mastered this process in evolution called photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the process by which they have pigments that harvest light, sunlight, use that in order to make sugars, and then from that, a whole vast array of organic compounds, an incredible array of compounds. And for, conveniently enough for us, a side effect of that process is a byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen, which we
Huh,
kind of need, right? And
big
the
time.
other thing it does is it uses carbon dioxide as the precursor chemical. So photosynthesis is the chief way by which carbon dioxide is being sequestered into organic matter out of the atmosphere. And of course, we're, polluting. We're way past the levels of carbon dioxide that we should be. And trees are the best. I'm amused when they talk about developing these carbon sequestration technologies. They want to build these.
We've got them already.
We've got the best carbon sequestration technology that ever
Yeah.
existed. They're called trees. And all we have to do is
Yes.
plant more damn trees,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Oh, let's not get started on that. Thank you for mentioning it. I have a question from Nelson, from Marco Sanchez, who is a ayahuasquero who work very closely with. And his question is, what do you recommend for integrating after medicine experiences? Or do you?
What do I, well, I don't have any standard protocol. I recommend that people should uh, take some time to reflect after the experiences, perhaps write a little bit if that's their inclination, or if you're visually oriented, you can draw some way to sort of not so much encapsulate the experience, because I don't really think you can, but maybe commemorate the experience, to reflect on it, to kind of reflect on it and take away the gems of what you have learned, and kind of put those into a context that you can reflect on and think about. Integration's very important, but I think everybody's integration can be somewhat different. I don't think there's any standard way to integrate psychedelic experiences. The important thing is that you give it a try, that these experiences are very impactful. So it's good to allow the time for it to settle in after the experience. Just don't get up the next day and go to work and start your, frenzied existence in this world. Give yourself some time to really sort of get down with what you've learned and reflect and just be kind to yourself. And also it's a reflection of these medicines should be respected and approached thoughtfully. And it's not just something that you take and then you go on to the next big thing, or the next stimulation.
Yeah.
We're so subject to so many options to, you know, have experiences. It's all about having experiences,
Bucket list.
which very often involve spending a lot of money and going someplace and doing something like that. You don't have to do any of that. You just make time for yourself to sit and reflect, write if that works for you, think about it, just think about it. Um, recognize that these experiences are kind of markers, mile markers on the road of life. They're special. And so they shouldn't be dismissed, and you should give them the respect that they deserve, and that involves, not immediately plunging back into the maelstrom of our frenzied existence, which is
Or
entirely too rampant
hallucinatory
these
reality.
days. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, well,
that's
anyway,
very helpful. That's actually
yeah.
very helpful. And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm having a lovely time. And thank you for all these great answers to the questions. And another one is, what is our relationship with the plant and fungal kingdoms, really? How would you characterize our relationship with them?
With the plant and fungal kingdoms, well, yes, this is all about symbiosis. I mean, we're
Right.
plants, symbiosis is really very important, and it's not talked about enough in biology. But symbiosis is really what drives evolution, more than competition, more than this idea of survival of the fittest. Evolution is based on the collaborative alliance of different organisms, and they help each other out, you know, and the organisms and, things that collaborate together advance evolutionarily. And if you look at the history of the evolution of life, for example, complex cellular life with nuclei and organelles and so on in the cells, the accepted understanding of that is that this is a reflection of what Lynn Margulies, who is an evolutionary biologist, wrote about called endosymbiosis. Originally, these things were free-living, single-celled organisms. And then when oxygen showed up on Earth as a result of photosynthesis, oxygen was actually a toxin. It is a toxin in a certain way. So a lot of single-celled organisms that were sensitive to oxygen eventually evolved. They became incorporated into larger cells, and then they weren't free living anymore. They became the organelles in the cells. So the chloroplasts, the mitochondria, the other subcellular structures that you see, you know, 4.5, 4 billion years ago, those were free living organisms. And so when it comes to humans and plants and fungi, we have co-evolved with these plant teachers for a long, long time, a very long time, depending on, I mean, if you put any credence of the stoned ape theory, which I've come to call the awakened ape theory as possibly a better term for it, but uh, there's good circumstantial evidence that we probably had relationships with psilocybin mushrooms as long ago as 2 billion years ago, maybe even longer.
Whoa, whoa.
And, there's fossil evidence and there's circumstantial evidence, which I don't need to go into right now, but you can make a good case for it. So we've been living, and you can make a good case for this early alliance of evolving hominids, probably in northern Africa, which we now know from paleoclimatology was not the desert that it is now. It was lake country, effectively, with frequent rains. It was warm. There were cattle there. We have the ancestors of the modern cattle. They found fossils in the same area that the hominid uh, remains are found, the Acheulean culture, which was a tool using culture that lived in this area from maybe around 2 to 4 million years ago. And probably those people were eating mushrooms. And most likely because they would have encountered them. They had to be there. All the Environmental factors were there. And these are hominids, so they're curious. We're curious apes, right? We're curious monkeys, and we're hungry also. So naturally, they would have been consumed. And then it's not that hominids ate mushrooms and suddenly they became enlightened, or they became linguistic, or they became conscious. This is a process that worked out over probably several million years ago. But evolutionarily, it's reflected in the rapid expansion of the size and complexity of the human brain. I mean, the early hominids, Homo habilis largely, was definitely human in a certain sense, but had a simpler brain, a smaller brain. That would have been the species that lived in this area. But if you look at the timeline of neural evolution, the size and complexity of the human brain effectively tripled in 2 billion years ago, over 2 million years. We went from about 500 cubic centimeters to Homo sapiens, which is about 1,500 cubic centimeters of size in the brain. 2 million years. Okay, 2 million years is seems like a long time, doesn't it? But in the evolutionary perspective, it's a blink of an eye. Consider that, I mean, the dinosaurs were 250 million years ago. The bacteria, things didn't even get interesting on Earth as far as living things until 500 million years ago. That's when complex organic life and multicellular life began to emerge. Before that, and there were anaerobic bacteria basically, and they were there, and that was what dominated the ecosystem. I mean, there was definitely life. It was fairly boring, actually. But when they started forming these symbiotic alliances and this efflorescence of complexity that led first to multicellular life and then branching into these different plants, animals, fungi, and the bacteria, the archaeobacteria and the other bacteria, uh, then things got very interesting because there was diversification of these species, right? And so that was a reflection of this emerging complexity. And so by the time uh, you know we know from the work on psilocybin that it reorganizes the architecture of the brain, right? I mean, you have the acute effects, which are profound in themselves. But then if you look at the longer term effects, you get changes in some synaptic connections, you get synaptogenesis, the formation of synapses, neurogenesis, the formation of new neurons, effectively rewiring the whole cortical system. And out of that emerges the ability to have language, real language, not just hoots and hollers, but real language. What is real language? Real language are sounds that are associated with meaningful images. The emphasis is on meaningful. What psilocybin and other psychedelics do very, very readily is they elicit a process called synesthesia, which is a experiencing of one sensory modality in another. So, for example, you can see music, right? Everyone who's had a psychedelic probably has had this experience. That's synesthesia. So, over millions of years, this association of sound, image, and meaning became the constellation that defines consciousness in the emerging hominids. So that's how we became, you know, that's how we constructed this reality hallucination that we live in. It's a reality in which ideas and symbols and images are every bit as real as the physical reality. And that's the one that we're immersed in most of the time. And that is a construction of the human mind over Well, effectively, millions of years of evolution. But 2 million years is a short time. So in some ways, it's like an explosive expansion of the human neocortex over this period, which led us to be led eventually to Homo sapiens. You know, we're supposedly the last, or we're the latest, I should say, uh, hominid in this sequence. Not necessarily the best, but we're the latest model. So you put it this way, and
Work
we're
in
the latest
progress.
model, and we're I mean, as active Homo sapiens, active human beings, we're all too acutely aware of the limitations that we have. You know, it's we're somewhere between on the trajectory from apes to angels. I think we're about halfway there. So we got a lot more,
Wow.
you know.
We more to go. And what we don't have much more at the moment is time in our conversation. We have about 8 minutes left, and I just want to come back to our title again, which I seem to have lost, of course, because too many things in here. But anyway, I want to come back to our original premise of the plants and fungi, and the relationship to wisdom in humans. And there is a question from Oliver um, talking about Indigenous people and their communities and their relationship with the plants. Can you elaborate on the definition of the subject matter of this panel, i.e., Indigenous wisdom? What is it? How do we white people approach this with respect and awareness of colonization, etc.? What do Indigenous people actually think of this psychedelic renaissance and all? Now, that's a
Well,
lot. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd love to
yeah,
hear a few moments of your
yeah,
thoughts.
that's a complex question. But one
It
thing
is.
I would remind people, we're all indigenous to Earth, right? We are Earthlings. We're indigenous to Earth. We have many cultures and many societies, but we're all indigenous to this place, which may be this planet with all its complexity of life may be extremely rare in the universe. I don't think it's the only one. I don't buy that, but I think that I think that for life to reach these levels of complexity is extremely rare. So we should honor and respect and recognize how precious this is and maybe think twice because we're busily destroying it. Indigenous people, in the sense that I think you mean it, they have been the stewards of these plants and this wisdom and these fungi for 2 million years, or certainly, several 100,000 years. They have been the stewards of these things and they've had this symbiosis. They don't think in those terms. Those are the terms of evolutionary biologists and people like that. But by nurturing these plants and exploring this wisdom and preserving this knowledge, that's symbiosis. That's the plants or fungi's gift to us. What do we give the plants? Well, plants and fungi, their agenda is simple. They simply want to grow. They want to, and we spread them around and we cultivate them and we produce them and we spread them around the planet and we grow them and nurture them, and they give back this incredible gift of wisdom and knowledge and understanding. So it's it's not an even relationship. I think we are by far the better beneficiaries of this. But I think the plants and the fungi appreciate it that we do, and the indigenous people, which we tend to think of, as people in different cultures that are not us, right? I mean, we're not indigenous. We think of ourselves, but really we are, because we're all indigenous earthlings. and from that perspective, we're all indigenous. We're not necessarily the Western people are not the people that have actively taken on the stewardship of nurturing these symbiotic relationships. And in fact, we're very busy trying to dismantle those and destroy them. So we've gone seriously off track in some ways. Uh, but some of us haven't, and we need to bring those people forward and hopefully this is a temporary insanity that we're going through and on the other side we may actually find some actual wisdom because if we don't, I mean, the alternative is too horrible to contemplate.
Leak, yes. I think of Joni Mitchell with don't you know what you don't know what you got till it's gone. And I think this blight at the moment is waking us up to the preciousness and the intelligence and the wisdom of nature around us that we've taken for granted. So it could go that way. Let's go that way.
Yeah, that's been the message
Yeah.
for so long, ever since we've been involved in this symbiosis. The message of the plants and the fungi has been, wake up, you monkeys,
Wake up.
wrecking this place. That's the message.
That's the message. Oh,
Yeah,
Dennis, it's just been a pleasure and an honor and so much fun having this conversation with you. I hope everybody that is listening and watching have enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope you have too.
I
And
have too. It's been great.
it has been great. And thank you so much for being involved with the Psychedelic Association of Canada and supporting us in many ways that you do. I invite everybody on the call to consider, if they're not already, becoming members. There's in the link, there's a website to go to. And I just want to again thank Scott Nelson for his support in making this Wisdom Keeper series possible. And our next one is April 14th, and we'll be talking to the wonderful Duncan Grady and Jennifer Davis, who are located in the Kootenays on Kootenay Lake in the
Okay.
Nelson area. And don't forget to tune in for that. And in the meantime, stay in your hearts. Thank you all.
Yeah.
See you
Thank you,
next time.
Gillian. Thank everyone at the Psychedelic Association. Thanks for inviting me. Shameless self-promotion here. Have a look at the McKenna
Please.
Academy, McKenna.Academy. There's good stuff up there. And a lot of our listeners will be interested in it. So thanks so
Yeah,
much.
the link has been in the chat, but thank you for mentioning it again. It just came up again. Thank you, everybody, and much love to you, Dennis.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Catch you
Bye.
next time. Okay.